"The moonstone has never chosen a child," the High Elder declared, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. And for a moment, every wolf in the kingdom believed those words were true. The sacred arena of Silver Hollow stood beneath a sky washed in moonlight, its ancient marble glowing like polished pearl. Hundreds of nobles filled the stone terraces rising around the ceremonial grounds. Alpha heirs stood proudly beside their families, dressed in fine ceremonial coats and silver crests, waiting for the moment their names would be remembered by history. At the center of the arena rested the moonstone, a crystal larger than a carriage, untouched by time and surrounded by white flames that flickered without heat. According to legend, the moon goddess herself had placed it there thousands of years ago. It did not recognize power. It did not recognize titles. It recognized destiny. King Ronan Blackthorn sat upon the royal platform overlooking the gathering. At 34, he remained the most powerful alpha in the territories. His dark suit was flawless, his silver crown gleaming beneath the stars, but there was a heaviness behind his eyes that no royal garment could conceal. Beside him sat Queen Celeste, beautiful and poised as always, though her smile seemed tighter tonight. For 8 years the kingdom had waited for an heir. For 8 years the moonstone had remained silent. One by one, young candidates stepped forward. Sons of alphas, daughters of noble bloodlines, children whose families had spent years preparing for this moment. Each approached the crystal with hopeful eyes. Each placed a trembling hand against its surface, and each stepped away disappointed. The moonstone remained dark. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The High Elder exchanged uneasy glances with the royal council. This was not supposed to happen. Then, from somewhere near the outer gate, a small voice broke the tension. "Excuse me." The sound was soft, almost lost beneath the whispers. Heads turned. A boy stood at the edge of the arena. He looked no older than 8. His brown jacket was worn from travel, and his boots carried dust from miles of road. He was clearly not a noble, clearly not a candidate. Yet he stood there without fear, staring directly at the glowing crystal. Several guards immediately moved toward him. "This area is restricted," one said firmly. The boy blinked. "I'm sorry," he answered politely. "I didn't know." His voice carried an unusual calm. Not arrogance, not nervousness, simply honesty. The crowd chuckled softly. Some nobles rolled their eyes. A few whispered about careless villagers who failed to understand royal customs. But before the guards could escort him away, something unexpected happened. The white flames surrounding the moonstone flickered. Then they rose higher. The entire arena fell silent. The boy looked around in confusion. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Nobody answered. The crystal suddenly released a pulse of silver light that spread across the courtyard like moonlit water. Gasps erupted from every direction. The guards froze. The council members stood from their seats. Even the High Elder seemed unable to breathe. The boy instinctively took a small step backward. Yet the light followed him. It wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak woven from starlight. King Ronan rose slowly to his feet. His pulse hammered against his ribs. There was something strangely familiar about the child's face. Something buried deep within memories he had spent years trying to forget. Then the impossible happened. The moonstone cracked with a sound like distant thunder. A single beam of silver radiance shot upward into the night sky, illuminating the entire kingdom. The High Elder stared at the boy with wide eyes before falling to one knee. Around him, nobles followed. Then council members. Then warriors. One after another, hundreds of wolves bowed their heads. The child stood frozen in disbelief. "Why is everyone looking at me?" he whispered. And far above them, hidden behind the clouds, a full moon emerged from the darkness, brighter than anyone had seen in generations. 8 years earlier, the kingdom celebrated beneath silver lanterns and moonlit banners. Music drifted through the royal palace while nobles filled the grand hall, dressed in their finest attire for what many believed would be a joyful announcement. Alara Whitmore stood near a marble balcony overlooking the festivities, one hand resting gently against the small curve of her stomach. She was carrying the future heir of the kingdom. At least, that was what everyone believed. A warm breeze moved through the open windows, carrying the scent of moonflowers across the hall. Alara smiled softly as she watched couples dance beneath crystal chandeliers. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a peaceful future. A family. A child. A home built beside the man she had loved long before he became king. Across the hall, however, another pair of eyes followed her every movement. Celeste Whitmore stood among the guests wearing a silver gown that sparkled beneath the lights. To everyone else, she looked graceful and elegant. But behind her smile lived something darker. Envy. It had followed her for years. Alara had always been the admired sister, the chosen one, the woman who earned the Alpha King's affection. No matter how hard Celeste tried, she always felt like she was standing in someone else's shadow. 3 weeks earlier, Celeste had quietly begun spreading rumors through the palace. Never openly, never directly. A carefully placed question here, a concerned observation there. She never accused Alara of anything. Instead, she planted doubt. "Do you think it is strange?" she would ask. "The timing seems unusual." By the time those whispers reached certain members of the council, they had grown into something far more dangerous. Questions about the unborn child. Questions about certainty. Questions that should never have existed. Ronan heard them all. At first he ignored them. Then he listened. Then he began doubting. The kingdom had powerful enemies. Political rivals. Noble families eager to challenge his authority. The possibility that his future heir could become the center of controversy frightened him more than he cared to admit. Celeste knew exactly which fears to exploit. Now, as the celebration continued, she stood beside several council members watching the final pieces of her plan unfold. The ceremonial horn echoed through the palace. Conversations stopped immediately. Every noble turned toward the royal platform. King Ronan stepped forward wearing black ceremonial robes trimmed in silver. The room fell silent. Alara's heart fluttered with excitement. This was the moment. The official announcement. The beginning of their future. Yet the instant their eyes met, a chill traveled through her chest. Something felt wrong. Ronan's expression lacked warmth. He looked distant, unreachable. The king slowly addressed the crowd. "Tonight, I make a decision for the future of this kingdom." The hall remained silent. Alara instinctively touched her stomach. Her child shifted gently beneath her hand. "Leadership requires sacrifice," Ronan continued. "Personal desires must sometimes yield to what is best for the realm." Confusion spread across the audience. Alara frowned. These were not the words she expected. Then Ronan extended his hand. Not toward Alara, toward Celeste. Gasps erupted throughout the hall. Alara felt her entire world tilt. Celeste stepped onto the platform beside him. Confidence shone in her eyes. Victory. The realization struck Alara like ice water. Her sister had known. Perhaps she had known all along. Ronan's voice echoed across the chamber. "I have chosen a different path for the future of this kingdom." The crowd stood frozen. No one seemed able to breathe. Alara looked directly at Celeste. For one brief second, her sister's perfect mask slipped. A small smile appeared. Not kind, not apologetic, triumphant. In that instant, Alara understood. This had never been about love. It had never been about destiny. Someone had carefully arranged this moment. And as whispers exploded through the grand hall, Alara realized the greatest betrayal had not come from the king alone. It had come from the sister standing proudly at his side. The applause began before Alara even reached the palace doors. That was the part she would remember most. Not the announcement, not the betrayal, the applause. Hundreds of people celebrating while her world quietly fell apart. She walked through the grand corridor alone, one hand resting protectively against her stomach. Behind her, music returned to the ballroom. Laughter followed. The kingdom had already accepted its new future. No one came after her. No one called her name. The palace that once felt like home suddenly felt enormous and unfamiliar. Moonlight spilled through stained glass windows, painting silver patterns across the marble floor. Every step echoed in the silence. By the time she reached her private chambers, tears blurred her vision. She closed the door gently and stood motionless. Around her were reminders of dreams that now belonged to someone else. A small cradle catalog lay open on a table. Tiny knitted blankets rested inside a basket beside the fireplace. There was even a sketch of a nursery she had spent weeks designing. Alara lowered herself into a chair and stared at the drawing. She had imagined showing it to Ronan. She had imagined watching him smile. Instead, he had stood beside her sister. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Hope surged through her chest despite everything. Perhaps Ronan had finally come. Perhaps he wanted to explain. Perhaps he realized the mistake he had made. She hurried to the door and opened it. Her hope vanished instantly. Celeste stood in the hallway. Elegant. Perfect. Victorious. She held a small velvet pouch in her hand. "May I come in?" Alara said nothing. Celeste stepped inside anyway. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument. Finally, Celeste placed the pouch on a nearby table. The soft clink of coins echoed through the room. "What is that?" Alara asked quietly. "Money." Celeste smiled. "You will probably need it." Alara stared at her sister in disbelief. "Need it? You are leaving the palace." Celeste's voice remained calm. "Life outside these walls is different." The words sounded polite, concerned even. Yet beneath them lay something sharp enough to wound. Alara slowly rose from her chair. "You planned this." For the first time, Celeste did not deny it. "I did what I had to do." "By lying?" Celeste folded her arms. People believed what they wanted to believe. The answer was enough. Alara felt something inside her finally break. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the way ice cracks beneath winter snow. She picked up the velvet pouch and placed it back into Celeste's hands. "Keep it." Her sister blinked. "You will need help." "I may lose a palace," Alara replied, "but I will not lose my dignity." For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across Celeste's face. Only for a moment. Then it disappeared. She turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. Ronan made his choice. Alara looked directly into her eyes. "No, you made sure he did." Celeste left without another word. Hours later, long after darkness settled across the kingdom, a royal messenger arrived carrying official orders. Alara was to leave before sunrise. Transportation had been arranged. A cottage near the northern frontier would be provided. Temporary support would be granted for 6 months. Nothing more. She read the document once, then folded it carefully. There was no apology attached, no farewell, no acknowledgement of the child she carried. Before dawn, she packed only what she could carry. Family photographs, several books, a silver necklace that had belonged to her mother. Everything else stayed behind. As the carriage rolled away from the palace, frost glittered across the gardens. Alara looked back one final time. High above the towers stood a balcony. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a familiar figure watching from the shadows. Ronan. The carriage turned. The palace disappeared from view. Alara lowered her gaze and placed both hands over her unborn child. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, "I promise you this. You will always be loved." And somewhere high above the clouds, hidden beyond mortal sight, the moon goddess listened. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the northern frontier weeks ahead of schedule, transforming the forests into a sea of white beneath endless gray skies. Inside a small cottage near the edge of the woods, Alara sat beside a crackling fireplace with a sleeping infant resting against her chest. The journey away from the palace had ended months ago, but some wounds still lingered. There were nights when memories returned without warning. Nights when she remembered the ballroom, the whispers, and the moment her entire future changed. Yet whenever she looked at her son, those memories lost a little of their power. Orion had become her reason to keep moving forward, her reason to smile again. The first years were not easy. The cottage was small. Money was limited. Every winter brought new challenges. Alara learned how to repair fences, chop firewood, and stretch every dollar as far as possible. Some days, she worked from sunrise until darkness. Through it all, Orion remained her brightest blessing. Even as a toddler, he seemed unusually gentle. He thanked people without being asked, shared whatever little he had, and somehow, animals trusted him almost immediately. Deer often appeared near the cottage without fear. Birds landed close enough to eat from his hand. Once, a wounded fox wandered into their yard during a snowstorm and refused to leave Orion's side for nearly a week. The neighbors noticed. Most smiled and called him special. Others exchanged uneasy looks when they thought Alara was not watching. As Orion grew older, the whispers began. They started quietly. Small comments carried by the wind. Questions asked behind closed doors. Who was the boy's father? Why did no one ever visit? Why did strange things seem to happen around him? Alara ignored the gossip as best she could. But children were less careful than adults. One afternoon shortly after Orion turned 6, he returned home much earlier than usual. Alara immediately sensed something was wrong. He placed a basket of kindling beside the door and sat quietly at the kitchen table. No smile. No excited story about his day. Just silence. Orion, she asked gently. What happened? The boy stared at his hands. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he finally looked up. There was hurt in his eyes. The kind of hurt no child should carry. Some boys in the village said I do not have a father. Alara's heart broke. She pulled out a chair and sat beside him. Orion swallowed hard. One of them said fathers stay when they love their children. The room suddenly felt smaller. The fire crackled softly in the background. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Alara reached for his hand. Listen to me. Orion lowered his eyes. Did my father not want me? The question struck deeper than anything she had faced since leaving the palace. Not because she lacked an answer, because she knew how much courage it had taken him to ask. She gently lifted his chin. You were wanted from the moment I knew you existed. By you. By me, she agreed softly. Every single day. Orion blinked rapidly. But not by him. Alara hesitated. The truth was complicated. Too complicated for a 6-year-old boy. Sometimes people make mistakes, she said. Big mistakes. That does not change your worth. Tears threatened to fill Orion's eyes, but he fought them back. Then why does it still hurt? Alara wrapped her arms around him and held him close. Because you have a good heart. For a long time they sat together beside the fire. Eventually Orion relaxed against her shoulder. Yet that night, after he had fallen asleep, Alara stood alone by the window watching snow fall across the dark forest. The question he asked continued echoing inside her mind. Did my father not want me? She wished she could protect him from every future disappointment. She could not. What she did not know was that destiny had already begun preparing an answer. And far beyond the cottage, hidden deep within the forest, a pair of glowing silver eyes watched over the sleeping child from the shadows. The winter Orion turned 7 was the coldest anyone in the northern frontier could remember. Snow buried the roads for weeks at a time, and icy winds howled through the forest day and night. Supplies became scarce. Travelers stopped passing through the region, and even the small village nearby struggled to keep food on their tables. Inside the cottage, Alara sat beside the fireplace counting the few coins she had left. The tiny pile seemed smaller every evening. Firewood cost more. Flour cost more. Everything cost more. Yet whenever Orion asked if they were going to be all right, she smiled and told him yes. She always told him yes. One evening, Orion pushed open the cottage door carrying an armful of firewood nearly as large as himself. Snow clung to his boots, and his cheeks glowed red from the cold. The scent of soup immediately filled the air. His eyes brightened. That smells amazing. Alara laughed softly. Wash your hands first. Orion hurried to the sink. Dinner was simple. A little broth, vegetables, and fresh bread traded from a neighbor. Yet Orion ate as though it were a royal feast. He spent the meal talking about the animals he had seen in the woods and a fox that followed him for nearly half a mile. Alara listened with a smile, but her heart remained heavy. The cupboard behind her was almost empty. There would not be enough food to survive another month. That night, after Orion fell asleep, Alara sat alone beside the dying fire. Moonlight streamed through the window and settled across her lap. In her hands rested the last valuable thing she owned, a silver necklace that had belonged to her mother. Her fingers traced the delicate crescent-shaped charm hanging from its chain. She remembered the day her mother had given it to her. Some treasures are worth more than gold, she had said. Alara closed her eyes. Then she carefully placed the necklace into a small cloth pouch. The following morning, she walked nearly 5 miles through snow-covered roads to a trading post outside the village. By sunset, the necklace was gone. In exchange, she carried home bags of flour, dried vegetables, firewood vouchers, blankets, and enough supplies to survive the rest of the winter. When she arrived, Orion ran outside to help unload everything. Where did all this come from? He asked excitedly. Alara smiled. I found a way. For several days, that answer satisfied him. Then one afternoon he accidentally discovered the empty jewelry box hidden inside her dresser. The necklace was gone. He knew exactly what it meant. That evening, he sat unusually quiet beside the fireplace. Alara noticed immediately. What is it? She asked. Orion stared into the flames. You sold Grandma's necklace, did you not? Alara froze. The room fell silent. How did you know? I looked for it. His voice softened. Because I wanted to see it again. Alara moved closer and sat beside him. Orion's eyes filled with tears. You love that necklace. Alara gently brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead. Then she smiled through her own tears. That necklace was my mother's memory. But you are my heart, Orion. The words broke through every wall he had been trying to build. He wrapped his arms around her and buried his face against her shoulder. Not because he was sad, because for the first time, he truly understood how much his mother had sacrificed for him. Alara held him tightly while the winter storm raged outside. Inside the small cottage, warmth filled every corner of the room. Neither of them noticed the faint silver glow beginning to shine beneath Orion's shirt directly above his heart. The crescent mark had returned. This time it remained visible longer than ever before. Far away inside the royal archives, an elderly historian opened an ancient prophecy and felt his breath catch in his throat. Because every sign described in the forgotten text was beginning to appear exactly as foretold. The winter eventually passed, but some wounds remained long after the snow disappeared. Orion carried one of those wounds with him every day. He rarely asked about his father anymore, yet Alara could see the questions still living behind his eyes. Whenever other children spoke about their families, he grew quieter. Whenever travelers arrived with stories about distant kingdoms and powerful leaders, he listened more carefully than anyone else. He was searching for something, even if he did not fully understand what it was. Spring brought warmer weather and more visitors to the frontier. Merchants, hunters, and travelers often passed through the village on their way north. Most stayed only a day or two before continuing their journeys. One afternoon, a wealthy nobleman arrived with several servants and rented a room at the village inn. His expensive clothes immediately drew attention. So did his attitude. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being important. That evening, Alara visited the market to purchase flour and supplies. Orion walked beside her carrying a small basket. The village square bustled with activity as merchants packed their wagons before sunset. Alara enjoyed moments like these. They reminded her that life continued moving forward. Then she heard someone say her name. Not kindly, not warmly. The voice carried surprise mixed with amusement. Alara turned. The nobleman stood only a few feet away. His eyes widened as recognition settled across his face. Well, he said slowly. This is unexpected. A chill ran through Alara. She recognized him too. Lord Barrett Ashford, a minor noble who frequently attended royal events years ago. He glanced at her simple clothes, then at the basket in her hands. Finally, his attention settled on Orion. Understanding flashed in his eyes. So this is where you ended up. Several nearby villagers paused to listen. Alara straightened her shoulders. Good afternoon, Lord Ashford. The nobleman smiled. I never imagined I would find the former mate of the Alpha King living out here. The square grew quiet. Orion froze. The basket nearly slipped from his hands. Alara's heart sank. For years, she had protected her son from the truth. Not because she was ashamed, because she wanted him to have a normal childhood. Now that protection shattered in a single sentence. Lord Ashford continued speaking, unaware of the damage he was causing. Life certainly changes quickly, does it not? Some villagers exchanged shocked glances. Others looked toward Orion with newfound curiosity. The boy stood perfectly still. What did you say? He asked softly. Lord Ashford looked surprised. You did not know? Alara immediately stepped forward. That is enough. Something in her voice finally silenced him. The nobleman cleared his throat awkwardly and walked away. But the damage was done. The walk home felt longer than usual. Neither Alara nor Orion spoke. The forest seemed unusually quiet around them. Even the birds had fallen silent. By the time they reached the cottage, the sun was disappearing behind the trees. Orion set down the basket. The Alpha King, he asked. Alara closed her eyes briefly. The moment she had feared for years had finally arrived. Yes. You knew him? Yes. Orion swallowed hard. Was he my father? The question hung between them. There was no escaping it now. No protecting him with half-truths. Alara slowly nodded. Orion stared at her. For several seconds he said nothing at all. Then he looked away. Not angry. Not confused. Simply hurt. Deeply hurt. So he knew about me? Alara's heart broke all over again. No, she answered honestly. He never met you. Orion walked to the window and stared into the darkening forest. Tears filled his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Then he does not even know I exist. That realization seemed to wound him more than anything else. Later that night, after Orion finally drifted to sleep, Elara sat beside the fireplace alone. Fear gnawed her thoughts. The truth was no longer hidden, and somehow she sensed that revealing it had changed everything. Outside, moonlight spilled across the forest floor. Deep among the trees, the crescent mark above Orion's heart suddenly began glowing brighter than ever before. And hundreds of miles away inside the royal archives, Theodore Vance uncovered a forgotten line in an ancient prophecy that made his blood run cold. The child rejected by a king shall be chosen by the moon. The prophecy changed everything. Theodore Vance sat alone inside the royal archives long after midnight, staring at the ancient parchment spread across his desk. Candlelight flickered against stone walls while silence filled the room. He had spent 3 days verifying every translation, comparing every record, searching for even the smallest mistake. There was none. The words remained exactly the same. The child rejected by a king shall be chosen by the moon. Theodore slowly leaned back in his chair. Throughout his life, he had studied prophecies, legends, and forgotten histories. Most contained symbolism, ambiguity, room for interpretation. This one did not. The meaning felt direct, uncomfortable, dangerous. Because if the prophecy was true, the future heir of the kingdom might not come from the royal palace at all. The following morning, Theodore requested an emergency audience with the royal council. The meeting quickly became heated. Several nobles dismissed the prophecy as superstition. Others argued that the signs appearing across the kingdom could no longer be ignored. Reports continued arriving from every corner of the territories. Ancient relics awakening, temple bells ringing without explanation, sacred wolves appearing near villages. None of it made sense separately. Together, however, they painted a troubling picture. What exactly are you suggesting? One council member demanded. Theodore opened the parchment. I am suggesting that the moon goddess has already chosen. The room fell silent. Across the table, Queen Celeste felt her pulse quicken. For months, she had sensed something slipping beyond her control. Now that feeling returned stronger than ever. Chosen whom? She asked carefully. Theodore met her gaze. That is what we must discover. Meanwhile, life in the northern frontier had become strangely restless. Ever since learning the truth about his father, Orion seemed different. Not bitter, not angry, just quieter, more thoughtful. Some evenings Elara would find him sitting beside the creek, staring at the water for long periods without speaking. He was trying to understand how a man could know nothing about his own son, trying to understand where he belonged. One afternoon, while walking through the forest alone, Orion noticed something unusual. The animals were behaving strangely. Birds gathered along branches overhead as though watching him. Deer stepped from the trees and remained nearby instead of fleeing. Even the wind seemed to carry a strange energy through the woods. Eventually, he reached the hidden clearing where he had once discovered the silver pendant. The ancient stone pillars stood exactly as before, yet something had changed. The symbols carved into the stone now glowed faintly even in daylight. Orion stepped forward. The crescent mark above his heart immediately grew warm. A pulse of silver light traveled across the platform. Then the voice returned. Soft, gentle, familiar. The time approaches. Orion spun around. Who are you? The forest remained still. What do you want from me? For several moments, there was only silence. Then the voice spoke again. You will soon stand where destiny calls. The glow intensified around the clearing. Orion's heart raced. I do not understand. You will. The light faded. The voice disappeared. Yet this time something remained behind. A silver feather rested upon the stone platform. Orion carefully picked it up. The moment he touched it, a vision flashed across his mind. A massive arena. Thousands of people. A crystal shining beneath moonlight. Then the image vanished. Orion staggered backward, breathing hard, confused. Far away in the capital, the moonstone suddenly released a brilliant pulse of light visible across the entire city. Temple bells rang immediately. Priests rushed into the streets. Citizens pointed toward the sky. The sacred crystal had remained dormant for decades. Now it was awake. By sunset, an official announcement spread across the kingdom. The ceremony of choosing would be held in 30 days. Every noble family would be invited. Every heir would present themselves before the moonstone. Yet hidden inside the ancient prophecy was one final line Theodore had not yet shared with anyone. because even he struggled to believe it. The moon shall not choose the strongest bloodline. The moon shall choose the forgotten son. The capital had not seen crowds like this in decades. Thousands filled the sacred arena long before sunrise. Noble families arrived in decorated carriages. Priests gathered beneath white banners bearing the symbol of the moon goddess. Every seat overlooking the ceremonial grounds was occupied. Everyone wanted to witness history. Everyone wanted to know who the moonstone would choose. Yet among the excitement and celebration, Alara felt only unease. She stood near the outer edge of the arena with Orion beside her. The silver pendant rested against his chest beneath his jacket. Since receiving the royal invitation, the crescent mark above his heart had glowed almost every night. The signs were growing stronger. Whatever destiny had planned, it was very close now. "Are you nervous?" Orion asked. Alara looked down and smiled gently. "A little." He nodded. "Me too." Across the arena, King Ronan sat upon the royal platform beside Queen Celeste. The years had changed many things, but not the weight he carried in his eyes. Ever since Theodore revealed the prophecy, an uneasy feeling had followed him everywhere. He could not explain it. He only knew that every instinct told him this day would alter the kingdom forever. The ceremonial horn sounded. Silence swept across the arena. One by one, noble heirs approached the moonstone. Sons of powerful alphas, daughters of ancient bloodlines, children whose families had spent years preparing for this moment. Each stepped forward confidently. Each placed a hand against the crystal. Nothing happened. The moonstone remained dark. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Concern appeared on the faces of priests and elders. Hours passed. More candidates came forward. Still nothing. Then the crystal pulsed. Once. Twice. A ripple of silver light spread across its surface. The entire arena froze. The High Elder stepped backward in surprise. The moonstone had finally awakened. Yet it was not reacting to any of the candidates standing before it. The light moved across the arena like flowing water. Searching. Watching. Then it stopped. Directly in front of Orion. Gasps erupted from every direction. The boy stared at the crystal in disbelief. "Me," he whispered. The silver pendant around his neck suddenly began glowing. At the same moment, the crescent mark beneath his shirt blazed brightly enough to shine through the fabric. The moonstone answered with a burst of silver light so powerful that many spectators shielded their eyes. Then something happened that no one expected. Images appeared inside the crystal. Not visions of the future. Memories of the past. The entire arena watched in stunned silence as scenes unfolded across the glowing surface. Alara standing in the palace years earlier, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Celeste whispering to council members behind closed doors. Rumors spreading through the court. Doubt growing. Then came the announcement. Ronan choosing Celeste. Alara walking away heartbroken. The palace watching her leave. The crowd gasped. No one spoke. The moonstone continued revealing everything. The exile. The lonely cottage. The difficult winters. Alara selling her mother's necklace to feed her son. Orion asking if his father ever wanted him. Tears filled countless eyes throughout the arena. Even hardened nobles lowered their heads in shame. Across the royal platform, Celeste turned pale. "No," she whispered. "Stop." But the crystal did not stop. Truth poured from it like moonlight. Every lie, every sacrifice, every forgotten moment. There was nowhere left to hide. Finally, the images faded. Silence remained. Deep, overwhelming silence. Then Orion looked toward the royal platform. His eyes met Ronan's. For the first time, neither needed explanations. The truth stood between them, visible to the entire kingdom. Ronan slowly rose from his seat. His face had gone pale. Regret, sorrow, and realization collided inside him all at once. Before he could speak, the moonstone released a final pulse of silver light. The High Elder dropped to one knee. "The prophecy is fulfilled," he whispered. "The forgotten son has returned. The forgotten son has returned." The words echoed across the arena long after the High Elder spoke them. Thousands stood frozen beneath the silver glow of the moonstone. No one cheered. No one moved. They were still processing what they had witnessed. The truth had not been revealed by a witness. Not by a rumor. Not by an accusation. It had been revealed by the moonstone itself. Every sacrifice. Every betrayal. Every tear Alara had hidden during the past 8 years now belonged to the entire kingdom. Orion stood quietly at the center of the arena. The silver light surrounding him felt warm rather than overwhelming. He looked toward his mother first. Not the king, not the elders, not the crowd. Alara smiled through her tears. For years she had worried that her son would grow up believing he was unwanted. Yet here he stood before the entire kingdom, chosen by the highest power they knew. At that moment, Orion took a single step forward and looked directly at King Ronan. The arena held its breath. Ronan slowly descended from the royal platform. Each step felt heavier than the last. He had faced wars, political crises, challenges that threatened the stability of the kingdom. None of them compared to this moment. When he finally stood before Orion, neither spoke immediately. The resemblance between them was impossible to ignore now. The same eyes, the same quiet strength, the same stubborn determination. Ronan swallowed hard. "I did not know," he said softly. Orion listened. "I know." There was no anger in the boy's voice. Somehow that made it harder. Ronan lowered his gaze. "That is not an excuse." Silence followed. Then Orion asked the question he had carried for years. "If you had known, would you have come for us?" The arena became perfectly still. Ronan closed his eyes. For a moment, he could not answer. Because the truth hurt. "I would like to believe that I would have," he admitted. "But I was not the man I should have been." Orion studied him carefully. Then he glanced toward Alara. She was. Tears filled countless eyes throughout the crowd. Orion's voice remained calm. "Honest. You are the king. But she is the one who raised me." The words struck deeper than any accusation ever could. Ronan nodded slowly. He accepted them because they were true. Then something extraordinary happened. The sky above the arena darkened. Not with storm clouds, with silver moonlight. A radiant glow spread across the heavens. Every person present looked upward. The air itself seemed to shimmer. Then a voice filled the arena. Gentle, powerful, impossible to ignore. The kingdom measured worth through power. The voice echoed across every stone and tower. But true worth is revealed through love. The moonstone blazed brighter than the sun. Silver light descended from the sky and settled around Alara. She instinctively stepped backward, but the glow followed her. Warm, comforting, familiar. The voice spoke again. "They forgot your sacrifice." Alara's tears fell freely now. "I did not." A crown of silver moonlight slowly formed above her head. The entire arena watched in awe. It was not placed there by a king, not by nobles, not by tradition. It came directly from the blessing of the moon goddess. One by one, the elders knelt, then the priests, then the warriors. Soon thousands throughout the arena bowed their heads. Not because they were commanded to, because they understood what they were witnessing. Alara Whitmore, the woman once sent away and forgotten, had been chosen as Moon Queen. The silver light then shifted toward Orion. The crescent mark above his heart glowed brilliantly. The moonstone answered with a pulse so powerful that its light spread beyond the arena and across the entire kingdom. "The future has been chosen," the voice declared. "Not through blood alone, but through character." Orion felt his mother's hand find his. He smiled. For the first time in his life, he did not wonder where he belonged. He already knew. As the moonlight slowly faded, cheers erupted across the arena. Not for a king, not for a prophecy, but for justice. Real justice. The kind that arrives quietly after years of waiting. High above the kingdom, the full moon shone brighter than ever before. And beneath its light, the woman they abandoned became a queen. The boy they overlooked became the kingdom's future, and the truth they tried to bury became the legacy that would be remembered for generations.